start the live stream, please, then?
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the Communities Committee on the 22nd of November, and another funny day of weather. And on the weather, I'd just like to give sort of thanks for the multi-agency response from all of the Angus Council members, I'm sure, as well as this committee, but for all the work that went into the dealing with the flooding and the bad weather and the emergency response and the picking up sheep and all sorts of things that our staff and teams did over the course of the last couple of days. You know, it was a really, really epic scale weather event, and the response, I think, from our team has been phenomenal. Councillor Fairweather, do you want to say something on that? You're muted if you're talking.
Sorry about that, convener. Yeah, right. Just to concur with what you're saying. You know, the council take an awful lot of stick sometimes for for the work it does. I just go back to one of the last storms where all these trees came down, etc. And then with this water, I've been there before when water has been up to the near the top of the goalposts at Hercules Den and Arbroath. And you know this, our officers do a fantastic job. They don't get nearly enough praise for it. Thanks.
Well said, Councillor Fairweather, and I totally wholeheartedly agree with those comments. Let's move on to the meeting itself. Do we have any apologies/substitutions?
Yes, convener, we've got apologies from Councillor Boyd, with Councillor Durno substituting. Apologies from Councillor Devine, with Councillor Chris Beattie substituting. And apologies from Councillor Jill Scott, with Councillor Speed substituting.
Thank you, Fiona. We move on to the minutes. We move on to declarations of interest. Do any councillors have a declaration of interest for this meeting? No. So we move on then to the minutes. Previous meeting, 3A. Are they an accurate record?
Agreed.
Yeah, and 3B, the Arbroath Harbour Joint Consultative Committee. We just got to note the meeting, submit for no in the minute. We'll do that. So we move on to agenda item 4, which is the Housing Capital Monitoring Report 2022-23. Which officer's going to lead on this one? Councillor Fairweather, you still got your hand up? Are you just ready?
Chair, if it's okay, well, can I come in?
I had my hand up to speak about the Harbour Board.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Fairweather. That's something that I think I've seen on before. So, Councillor Fairweather, on you go.
No, not a problem. Right, obviously, I chaired I'm only the interim chair. I chaired the first meeting of the Harbour Board. Let's say that it was rather exhilarating, right to say the least. Remember, I'm only interim chair. I'm quite happy still to continue in that role, but if one of the SNP members wishes to take over, I'll have no objection.
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Fairweather. I think your convenership was actually confirmed at the last Communities Committee, so you are convener of the Harbour.
Is that the one I was on holiday at?
Yes, yes. Yes, so you were confirmed at that meeting as
well. Can I just thank the committee for doing that in my absence?
You're welcome, Councillor Fairweather, and I apologise for not congratulating you on your new position. I don't know if you can see Councillor Proctor, but he's having a chuckle at that one. So let's. Are we okay there, Fiona? I don't think I've done the Harbour Joint Board, but we're just happy to move on from our. Do we actually need to record it?
Yes, we just need to note it, and
that's fine.
And that's it.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Fairweather. And John, sorry about that. If you move on to Housing Capital Monitoring Report, item 4.
Yeah, sorry, that was a bit precipitate. Sorry, apologies to David there. So yeah, this is the capital monitoring report for the HRA, and it sets out our position up to the end of September, and also projects the outturns for the HRA capital programme until the end of March 2023. So the figures are in the report in terms of how much we've actual expenditure so far and what that looks like against the monitoring budget of £12.7 million. So I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Any questions on that? Councillor Stewart, you've got your hand up first.
Thanks, convener. The table at 5.1, I think that's page 16, I think. Am I right in saying that there's just going to be another £8 million to be spent by the end of the financial year, and 7 million of that is going to be on the energy towards zero carbon savings? My question is some of the 7 million, does that come from grants from the government? And also, I'm just concerned that, there's nothing much being spent on improvements to our stock, and there's also very little on the aids and adaptions. One other question I've got is, what is the miscellaneous that's listed in there? Can we find out what that is? That's my question, please.
Chair, do you want me to come in and respond to that?
Just come in, John, as soon as the last day.
Yeah, Councillor Stewart, there's a number of things there. I think the first one, you're right. There's the actual spend is looking at about 25% at the moment, I think. But because this report details the capital expenditure until the end of September, and because there's a lag in the terms of the costs that come into us, probably we're looking at the first 4 months or so of actual expenditure. So actually the 25% is not far off the projected spend to the end of the year is what we'd actually expect at that stage. It's just the way that the committee cycles fall that unfortunately we're here in November, but we're probably looking at the actual expenditure, as I say, back at the middle of August, I suspect. So we're pretty much on track as in terms of the expenditure with what we expect to see by the end of the year, albeit probably 10% under the overall monitoring budget. In terms of the things like aids and adaptations, actually expenditure is quite not bad there under aids and adaptations. There was a bit of a lag when the occupational therapy service in the Health and Social Care Partnership was catching up with the backlog created through the pandemic. They're working through that still, but because they've accelerated, that's allowed us to get more aids and adaptations work on the ground, and we're confident that we're bringing that expenditure up to what we'd set out at the start of the year. The miscellaneous area covers things like garages, garage improvements, garage demolitions, smoke detectors, and so on. So, as it suggests, kind of areas of work that don't naturally fall into some of the other the headings. But you mentioned also energy savings. You're quite right to pick that out. We've accelerated the energy program. The energy program now includes things like windows and heating as well as the external insulation. But overall, our expenditures up and over and above the original budget, which offsets to some extent some of the slowdown in the new build projects. But overall, I think considering the volatility and uncertainty in the markets at the moment, we're quite happy with the profile of the expenditure, albeit, as I say, we expect to be somewhat about 10% under the monitoring budget come the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Is that you, Tommy? Are you fine with that? Okay, we move on to Councillor Fairweather.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Mr. Morrow, for your report. Obviously, I understand all the issues and the problems that we're going through at the moment, and on page 16, 6.2 makes that abundantly clear. But can I just ask, going down a little bit on that, because of the rising tender prices are leading many housing organisations across the country to review their capital programmes. Can you tell us what review we're doing, Mr. Morrow?
I mean, I think probably we're looking ahead to the report that we will bring. As you know, Councillor Fairweather, we have our rent setting and business plan report that comes to committee in February each year, where we set out our proposals for the year coming, and that's probably, I think, a question which we can address, in full at that committee. But obviously we're looking ahead, and as you say, like other organisations, we are considering what expenditure is possible, and the uncertainty that the high interest rates, the high rates of inflation and so on are bringing. And we've mentioned the tender prices because, like a lot of housing providers and other businesses across Scotland, we are seeing an increase in the trend in tender prices. And of course, what that does, it makes us consider whether some of the projects that we have in our planning system are going to be viable in the short term. We think in the long term, obviously, we still want to deliver on our commitments. But one of the things we're considering is perhaps stalling some of the projects until such a time when the economic environment is a bit more stable and we have more confidence in the prices that we might get. And also, I have to say, we've got more confidence then in contractors that we might procure, because what we don't want to do is get into a position where we start projects and then a contractor might, not be able to sustain their business and go into administration, because that then will put us into a tricky position. So I think the uncertainty in the global markets and the economy is making us consider whether we need to hold off on some of the projects, and that obviously will tend to create some slippage in the capital programme. We're considering a number of scenarios at the moment, and some of it, I have to say, is based on what level of rent rise we might be able to achieve going forward. Clearly, the cost of living situation is such that we have to consider the affordability of our rents alongside the viability of our capital programme. And with an inflation rate of 11.2% at the moment, any rent rise is not going to come anywhere close to that. The rent freeze that's been imposed by the Scottish Government through the emergency legislation is a complicating factor, because that may or may not be extended for 6 to 12 months after the end of the year. So we're looking at different scenarios in terms of the rent rise that we might have, or no rent rise, depending on whether the rent freeze is extended, and what impact that might have on the capital programme going forward. That will have a material influence on what type of projects we can go forward with. Clearly, we have commitments in terms of meeting targets like zero carbon, the replacement for EIS2 and so on around energy efficiency. But we also have commitments in terms of making sure that our smoke detector and fire systems are up to date, that we're still delivering improvements like kitchens and bathrooms. So areas that we're considering where we might hold off are things like new build projects, because they are kind of a nice to have rather than an essential. But all of that, as I say, we're looking at the different scenarios, and we hope to come back with more information and detail when we present our business plan and rent setting report to committee in February.
Supplementary for that, please, Chair.
Yep, on you go, Councillor Fairweather.
Yeah, thank you. I totally understand about the new build. But what I did ask, and that was a rather long answer you gave me. But what are we going to do about our houses? Now I understand, and perhaps Mr. Morrow, you can tell me how many voids we've got, and are we looking at bringing these voids back into circulation? Obviously, of course, and I'll just add to the end, so I don't have to come in again. There will be voids out there, which I don't think we should be doing. But are voids being looked at, Mr. Morrow?
Yeah, I mean, one of the areas where we've had a bit of a lag is in our changes of tenancy and voids, as we refer to them. That's a kind of a leftover from the pandemic, but also the difficulties that you'll be aware of, Councillor, around the contractor that we had, who pulled out of the contract with us. So we're catching up on that, and I'm pleased to say that our performance, now that we have a contractor that's working well, has been vastly improved. So for instance, since April, we've been able to let 686 properties this year. So that's a vast improvement on the voids that we did have. But one of the things, as you say, that we want to make more use of is empty properties, and that does include our own empty assets. So you're quite right, voids is a priority for us. So we are focusing a lot more on that, because if we can achieve a higher turnover of voids, that means that we can allocate more houses, and therefore we can get more tenants into affordable housing that need them, and deliver that probably much quicker than we could, say, with some of the new build projects. So that's a natural thing to look at. In terms of the actual numbers, that's that changes on a daily basis, but I can certainly get you the numbers say at the end of the week in terms of what the numbers we're looking at the moment, and the numbers also that we've turned around this year. So I think, like other authorities, we're thinking that increasing the number of voids that we bring back into the lettings pool is going to, in the end, deliver more success probably in the short term than relying so much on the new build. We hope to bring the new build back in the midterm and long term, obviously, but you're quite right, voids is a priority.
Yeah, seems sensible. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Fairweather. Councillor Proctor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Morrow. In fact, I think you've answered quite a bit the question I was going to ask you when you answered Councillor Fairweather's question. And again, it was on voids, because we had rather a large number of voids, and I know that there's lots of people on the housing list waiting to get houses. And one of the things that elected members are all often asked, irrespective of what ward you're in, why is there so many empty council houses and so many folk are wanting them? But I think you've explained quite a bit in that when you answered Councillor Fairweather's question. But if there's anything else you would like to add, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I can add, the voids that we have vary in complexity and levels of work. And obviously one of the things we try to do and certainly want to do when we're focusing more on the voids is to make sure that we take the opportunity to make any planned improvements whilst the property is empty, because the last thing we want to do is carry out intrusive works when the properties are occupied, because that's an imposition on tenants in their home. So if we can make improvements whilst the property is empty, we want to do that. What that does, though, is it complicates the process, because it's not always something then that our usual void contractor can complete without acquiring more components. So, for instance, we might put in a new bathroom, we might do an adaptation whilst the property is void. So that means that it's more complicated, therefore it means it takes longer. So we try and balance that as much as we can. There is pressure on us, obviously, to return the voids as quickly as possible. But as I say, we want to try and take the opportunity as much as we can to do as many improvements at that time. So it differs from property to property in terms of complexity. But as I say, with a bit more resource pushed towards that rather than say some of the other capital projects, we hope to increase the pace of the delivery and the quality of the product as well.
Thank you, John. Is that you, Councillor Proctor?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Brace.
Thanks, convener, and maybe a wee question, Mr. Morrow here. At a previous meeting, I think Councillor McLaren asked a question, and I touched on the subject of meter debt. Would Mr. Morrow maybe give us a few words about meter debt and the knock-on consequences of it regarding voids?
Yeah, I'll choose my words carefully, actually. Debt on meters is certainly a problem, not just for us, but pretty much every local authority. And it's not just debt on meters, it's also reluctance of some of the utility companies over the last few months to take on new customers. That's not perhaps so much of a problem here as it is, say, in some of the islands, for instance, where it's pretty much impossible to get a utility company to provide a meter and take on customers, even when there's new build projects that have been completed. But for us, getting the debt written off on some of the meter debt cleared has been a problem. We are still in discussions with the utility companies about how we can come up with a much faster process for doing that. We're almost there, and we've almost cleared some of the backlog. So we hope in the next couple of weeks, and certainly by Christmas, to have completed that those discussions, and that should enable us to not only bring more properties back in the short term, but it'll also increase the pace of the change of tenancy process as well going forward. So we're confident that we're almost there, but I know it is a problem still for some of our neighbouring and neighbouring authorities and other colleagues across Scotland. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Councillor Brace, but
yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The last question to Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor MacDonald. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but yeah, a question might come in the mix. But it was just regards to the reporting of our new builds. So on one hand, we're noting in terms of the impact of the pandemic and supply issues and increasing costs. But later on in reporting, it's also to be noted in terms of the fact that we've actually delivered and kind of gone above and beyond our targets, which has been a good news story in terms of delivering during a really difficult time. So yeah, I just was kind of the two kind of contradicts itself. And also in terms of future investment into our current stock, I welcome this and welcome, you know, investment and improvements within current stock to make those homes more sustainable and desirable for applicants. But are we confident enough in terms of kind of some of the issues that we've had with contractors that those contracts and relationships are in much more of a robust position to be able to deliver on those ambitions?
Yeah, I mean, taking the first part, Councillor Speed, I think you're possibly referring to the report that we're probably going to come onto in a couple of minutes, the Strategic Housing Investment Programme, where we talk about the number of new builds that we've achieved over and above the target. But or maybe, if it's okay with you, come back to that when we come back to that report. But you're quite right, we are still hoping that we have a capital programme that enables us to invest in our existing homes and probably focusing more on the existing homes, as I say, rather than necessarily the new build if we have to be a bit more prudent with the way that we design our capital programme, depending on the income that we achieve, when we might have rent rises much lower than the rates of inflation. So that kind of business sense about being prudent with the income and expenditure is sets the kind of context for the capital programme that we plan. And that focus, as I say, inevitably has to be on making sure that our existing stock meets the requirements and the targets that we have set for us by either the government or the regulator, or indeed the current targets we set ourselves. Not sure, I can't remember what your last question was. Was there a further question?
It was just with regards to kind of ongoing issues there have been with contractors and works carried out.
Yeah. And you're quite right, I think, in that, and in terms of, we did go through a patch, obviously, with a particular contractor that didn't perform as we wanted, and they themselves would probably admit that they didn't perform as well as they wanted. So that relationship didn't work out. But we now have a much better service from the contractors that we have, and the relationship with those is much improved over what it was in the past, and that has resulted in, as I say, an improved performance in terms of the void turnover, and also improved performance in getting through the backlog of general unplanned repairs. I would still admit that you know, there's some repairs that are still causing us some issues, and it doesn't help when you get heavy rain events like Friday, and that will mean a whole load of roofing repairs that need to be done, and other things that sometimes get in the way of the kind of the recovery that we had in sort of chain. But I think overall our relationship with contractors is much better, and now, as in most things, you know, when you've got better business relationships between different organisations, then you get a higher level of success and achieve outcomes a lot better. So we're confident in that, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener. Is it okay just to come back with a quick follow-up, like a quick other question? Is that okay? It was just with regards to the St Thomas development, and I just wondered, given all that's been discussed, if you could just provide, just a brief update with regards to that, because I know for Arbroath that kind of future development site is something that is going to make a big difference to our wait times and, you know, the demand on housing in that particular area. So,
I mean, Chair, do you want me to cover that? I mean, St Thomas is one of the projects that's set out in the Strategic Housing Investment Plan, but I can address the question for Councillor Speed if you're happy enough here.
We'll go to the next agenda item because you're going to come back to the other, and we'll get it in there.
Yep.
Okay, we'll move on. Anyone else got any comments since Lois opened the comments door? Councillor Melville.
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and thanks, Mr. Morrow, for that. And on page 16 at 6.3, I think the accelerated spend on the energy savings measures is really, really welcome, and particularly in the current economic climate. And I just want to say that the faster we can progress those works, the better, not just for tenants, but for the planet as well.
Thank you, Councillor Melville. We're asked to, that's the last of the comments that have been indicated. we're asked to review and scrutinise the contents of the report. I think we've done that there. So we've covered recommendation 1. And do we note the projected out and underspend as described in 5.1? Is that noted?
Noted.
Okay, we move on to agenda item 5, which is the Strategic Housing Investment Plan 23-24. John, are you speaking to this one again?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to find the relevant page in
30 in our papers.
Yeah. I've got the wrong. Yeah, so Strategic Housing Investment Plan, or SHIP for short, sets out our 5-year plan for 2023-24 to 2027-28. And really the Strategic Housing Investment Plan details the projects that we and our housing association partners put forward in conjunction with the Scottish Government to deliver our affordable housing commitments and also utilise some of the grant funding that comes from government. This report also details the proposals for the use of resources from the Affordable Housing Revenue Account. I think probably most of the detail is in the paper, and members obviously will note that the projects themselves that we're proposing with some of the timescales are set out in the report as well. So that probably is a point to say. Has anybody got any questions about it?
Yeah, any questions? It might be worth Councillor Speed's points from the previous report.
Yeah, and Councillor Speed, you mentioned the St Thomas project. I wonder if there might be a point to bring in my colleague Catherine Johnson, who has a bit more knowledge about the actual detail. But Catherine, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, sure. The St Thomas project is in the SHIP to start on site in 25-26. We don't, because that's one of the projects that is in the kind of towards the end of the current 5-year programme. We don't have any kind of definitive timescales in terms of getting a planning application and things in for that, but ongoing at the moment with getting the scheme developed and put together. But that one is towards the end of the current 5-year programme.
Chair, if you're happy, meet us to add to that. One of the things that Councillor Speed, whilst we talked in under the last report about the potential for holding off on some of the expenditure around new build, what I think we're keen to do is still develop the designs for the sites that we have in our programme, and make sure that we are ready and we have projects ready to go to tender and so on. So we can still continue that work, and that work would still entail obviously making sure that as elected members you're aware of our plans for each of the sites, and also if it's applicable, engaging with residents as well. So we want to make sure that we're still continuing that work, and actually if we do end up holding some of the projects at sort of tender stage, it enables us to spend a bit more time on the design, getting the designs right, and having a better understanding of what the outcomes we can deliver and the actual costs that we expect as well. So it won't be time lost, it will be time well spent, I think. But certainly even if there might be a slight hold on some of the projects, we're still determined that these sites are going to be very valuable in terms of adding to our additional our affordable housing assets. So they'll still be delivered within that sort of mid-term as opposed to the short term.
Thank you, John. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you very much, convener. John, just a quick question on page 42, paragraph 8 point other RSLs. I just wonder, you've listed loads of other, up above, organisations we're working in tandem with. And I just wonder, are we still keeping open communication with VHS, Veterans Housing Scotland, to maybe try and replicate the very successful project that took place at the Camas development in Carnoustie? Is there still sort of conversations ongoing or lines of communication open and that sort of thing with VHS?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Proctor. Yeah, we have had those discussions, as you know, with VHS and the potential for particular sites where we might be able to replicate the Camas Camas Crescent development. So yeah, that's still in our planning. At the moment, we had some initial discussions with VHS. Whilst we take forward the sort of the design of the sites, we haven't had any discussion of late. But I think we've got this kind of principle of what we want to deliver. Once we get back into the detail design around the sites, I think that's when we'll reopen those discussions, because we're still happy to and hopeful that we can deliver something along the same lines as we had at Camas Crescent.
That's very encouraging, because, you know, Angus Council, we were the leaders in this, and I hope that we continue to keep that momentum. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Thank you, John. Councillor Durno.
Thanks, convener. A couple of years ago, John, I spoke to you about prefab modular housing, that was at the Commonwealth Games. It was used for housing the athletes at that time. Obviously, I'm on Scotland Excel, and I had a meeting with Mary Mitchell last week, who does the buy-in for the whole of Scotland for Excel regarding prefab houses. And she made myself aware of the fact that the prefab companies all tend to be at the south of Scotland, and they don't particularly want to put prefab housing on transporters to transport to the north of Scotland. And it's been very difficult for the Excel to get people to take up tenders. Has there been any any conversations with any other prefab housing associations or persons in the north of Scotland, which may be more easier for us to get that product? Because obviously we could maybe put it on a boat, but it's all expense. And when you work out your site fees, etc., and all your groundwork, because obviously waiting till 25 for St Thomas's to have houses on it, when you can actually have a prefab house up in about 2 weeks, is really unfortunate. So just wondered if you'd had any conversations or anything forward planning, looking at more prefab houses, just for the availability and the quickness of getting them on site. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are. I know we are. We're looking at the different options for how we deliver our affordable housing on our sites, and off-site manufacture or some level of prefabrication modular units is something that we're looking at. I mean, I think it can. You're right. It can deliver efficiencies. I think, though, that the costs that you have are still there's a lot of costs in the ground in terms of infrastructure and substructure and so on. So there's still a lot of those costs around that kind of preparation. You're quite right, I think, Councillor Durno, that the off-site manufacture can bring a lot of more accuracy in terms of the build that's going on inside a kind of a controlled internal environment, rather than being outside in the kind of wet, windy weather that we have. So that tends to bring greater accuracy in the unit itself. You still have to marry that up, though, with the substructure on the site. So there's still a bit of an element of kind of the messy side. I think it would be much more effective in terms of cost. You're quite right, if there were a manufacturing facility in the north of Scotland, north of the Central Belt, and that then would mean that you wouldn't have those transport difficulties, because it's not just the cost of transporting the units, there's the practicalities of whether you can get the units under bridges and along motorways and along the little roads, and you have to do that in tandem with the police being aware of that. So that has caused some problems in the past. So in an ideal world, I guess there would be sufficient turnover of units to warrant a company setting up a manufacturing facility north of the Central Belt, and that would bring obviously skills and employment opportunities, as well as the benefits in terms of having an off-site facility here. So it's certainly something that we're keen to look at. We have used some level of off-site manufacture in the Timmer Greens development in Arbroath. That's a kind of a halfway house. There's a sort of a off-site panelized construction method that's been used there. So there are different levels of off-site manufacture and modular units. That was relatively successful, but I wouldn't say necessarily that delivered cost savings over the kind of more traditional route. But I think going forward, the off-site modular units can bring, as I say, greater accuracy in the construction. If there is greater accuracy, you then probably have a tendency to have much more airtight units, so it brings energy efficiency improvements that probably would be hard to achieve to the same level through the traditional method. So I think, again, with a slight hold perhaps in some of the projects that we have, that gives us time to research what method might be beneficial for us, and that off-site approach and modular approach is certainly something that we're keen on, and it has been successful elsewhere, and we would be keen to learn from that, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if my colleague Andrea Wilson is here. She might want to add to that because she has a lot more technical knowledge than I do. If Chair, if that's okay, if Andrea's available to come in.
Yes, and just as a point, the CCG that's in Arbroath actually delivered the Athletes Village in for the Commonwealth Games. Yeah, I mean, pretty much just echoing what John said, that the transport of these units is the issue, and just for all to remember that we do actually, even with standard timber kit, we are actually doing some degree of off-site manufacture, as the kits are manufactured in a factory and brought onto site. Other than that, there's not really much to add to what John said. He's covered that well.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Speed.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, it was with regards to kind of particular needs housing and kind of need and demand. Although it does kind of look reasonable on paper, I have kind of queried and asked for information with regards to kind of stock in terms of kind of partially adapted, fully adapted, bespoke type properties. And, you know, I know that there's been a struggle to be able to produce that information, as well as kind of combine that with kind of data and intelligence that we have from kind of our kind of healthcare, from children's healthcare through to adult healthcare with the Health and Social Care Partnership. So it does concern me a little bit around like the targets that we set and what we're comparing it to, or what we're kind of looking at when we make these targets, but also as well just knowing that the kind of the wait times for people that require a particular type of accommodation are often still very lengthy. And I think, as you know as well, I've raised concerns about some new builds where there is the potential to maximise kind of that lifelong home approach, that kind of fully adapted approach, where there's ground floor level access properties with the accommodation on the one level, and, you know, a recent development where we then had bath installs rather than level access showers. So when those properties went for bidding, you know, people with a medical need couldn't apply. So I guess I'm really just wanting to highlight ongoing concerns, but seek assurances that, you know, this will, you know, you will continue to try and find and gather that type of information and data, and also the kind of current review with regards to the allocation policy and choice-based letting and the complexities around that will also be putting a spotlight to ensure that we're not creating greater inequalities in reality, and that what's been presented in paper actually matches people's experiences who are seeking those type of properties.
Chair, if it's okay, can I bring in my colleague Catherine Johnson, just on the sort of the SHIP aspects to those questions, Councillor Speed, if that's okay?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, Councillor Speed, I know this is something that we've discussed in kind of various ways over the years, and it is something that we are getting better on, but it's a really difficult area for us in terms of gathering that information, because it comes from a lot of different sources, and there's a lot of different ways that people present as having a need for adapted housing. So it's very difficult for us to kind of project with any kind of pinpoint accuracy how many people need a very specific type of accommodation and where it needs to be. So that is often the difficulty that we have. We are now meeting our targets in terms of delivering the adapted and wheelchair housing within the SHIP. It's taken us a couple of years to get there. Now, I know in the early years of that target that we had from the local housing strategy, we weren't meeting it, and we said over those years that the properties that were coming through now would mean that we would meet the target, and now we're seeing that now we're at the end of that target, that we are meeting it, and that's kind of indicative of the length of time it takes from setting the target to getting units on site that were developed and planned while we knew that was the target that we were trying to meet. But we are now meeting that target, so we will continue to, and the SHIP, I think, projects that in some cases we're going to be able to exceed that target in the next couple of years. But getting that accurate data in terms of, like I say, where people require housing and what's very specific type of housing it needs to be means that often we're planning for an individual household, and that's why it can take a long time to meet their need, because where we're in a situation where a need presents to us, we have to find a suitable location, we have to develop a specific house type that meets their needs, and then we have to build it. So when we're doing those types of cases where we really are developing for individuals, it can take a long time. But you're right in terms of making sure our overall stock is as suitable as possible. The development that you mentioned there in terms of houses that didn't have level, that were kind of level access but had baths, I don't think that was a council development, because I was aware of that one, but I think it was one of our housing associations, and we have discussed that with them, because it was our understanding that any property that was being developed as a new build should be done to with a shower on the ground floor. So properties that are being developed from now on should be meeting that, and that's something that we've raised through our Affordable Housing Delivery Group. We are at the moment updating the housing need and demand assessment, which gives us that kind of global data, and there's quite a lot of detailed information in there, both in terms of both self-reporting but also national data and local data that will help us better understand where the needs are for individual properties and where we need to kind of focus our efforts in terms of putting in more particular needs housing. We're also waiting for an update on the Housing for Varying Needs standard from the Scottish Government. That's part of the Housing to 2040 strategy that is going to look at updating that general standard and make sure that it is meeting as many needs as possible. So once we get that updated information from the government, both social housing and private housing will become more accessible as a result of that, is what we hope. So it will be good to get that and be able to make sure that what we're delivering is in line with the government standards.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Convener.
And the last question to Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Morrow, for yourself, we've never actually met. Just thinking in terms of, I've got one random thing to ask, but something that is relevant to how this conversation's going. My husband and I were councillors in Aberdeenshire before, and I remember asking on social work and housing kind of the same question I'm about to ask you. But when we speak in terms of delivering on roads, and we didn't have the kind of trains that can take too much freight, but we do have shipping. And I kind of think really in terms of coming up from and through the northeast up to Aberdeen City and even slightly beyond. I just wonder, I'll ask something here and I wonder, but what daft classy question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How much collaboration would there be thought about working with peer local authorities insofar as I'll just say the housing that was mentioned earlier, the prefabs, which incidentally my husband grew up in one. I just wondered if there was any of that went on, because I'm sure if there were and you were able to get that, the economies of scale must make it possible. So that's one question. If you wouldn't mind having a wee stab at that.
Yeah, if you want me to come in and answer that point. I think you're right. You can achieve economies of scale, obviously, if you combine capital programs and combine project delivery into a much larger program. That, whilst in theory, I think it could deliver some efficiencies of scale and thereby make some off-site manufacture more effective in delivery and more sort of cost effective, I suppose. I think the practicalities have always been quite difficult in merging capital programs so that the projects dovetail. You could say that we already work in close combination with our partners in Angus, and that's what the SHIP report, which we're discussing, sets out. But it's more individual organisations delivering their own projects. So I think probably what you're suggesting is that we combine the procurement across several organisations. That could be local authorities or it could be other social housing providers. That is certainly something that we would consider, and I know the government are looking at the potential around that. And I would say that, yes, it probably can deliver some cost savings, but I think there are practical difficulties because each organisation has its own income and expenditure and business plans. And especially as we suggested earlier and against the earlier report, with the uncertainty that there is in the economic environment, that will probably work against collaboration, I would suspect, because each organisation is thinking about its own business planning. And any collaboration, I think, over projects that are already uncertain and volatile would increase the risks. But I agree with what you suggest, that there's potentially efficiencies that could be gained through the economies of scale. And that, in a sense, is probably what I was kind of hinting at, that in terms of off-site manufacturing facility, if there was a more certainty for a company over the cash flow, it might be that a manufacturing facility could be set up in the north. But for that to happen, it would need a commitment in terms of numbers of units from a number of organisations to ensure that they had some level of knowledge about sustainability. So that could be looking at the strategic housing investment plans of ourselves, our neighbours in Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen and Moray, for instance, and Dundee, and putting those together, perhaps in combination with discussions with the Scottish Government, could then give some confidence to businesses to look at an overall delivery of unit numbers. And to some extent, that the Excel new build procurement framework gives some of that certainty. I think the trouble is, though, that the economic situation has got in the way of that. So it's making each organisation, as I say, kind of revisit their plans for the future. But hopefully, when we get back to a more certain economic environment, that is the kind of thing that I think could deliver real benefits in terms of costs, but also in terms of the effective kind of design of a modular unit that we might use in the future. So certainly worth investigating.
Thank you very much, John. Now, just a random question again, because it's my past again. On page 49, I used to work at Strathmartin Hospital, and you've got there 3 boxes up since Strathmartin Hospital under HHA, 1,257,504. Could you maybe just explain that to me, please? Is that possible? That's on page 49.
I'm going to, if the chair is okay with that, I'm going to ask my colleague Catherine Johnston.
Thank you.
I'm
Thanks
going to
very
put her
much.
on the line.
I like Councillor Clark there throwing in a sneaky second question.
I did say there were 2. I did say there were 2.
Go forward.
That's a development being taken forward by one of our housing association partners, Hillcrest Housing Association. So that's what the HHA stands for. And they are in discussion with a developer in terms of acquiring that site and developing it as affordable housing. So the amounts of money there are the amounts of grant money that has been allocated to that project through the Strategic Housing Investment Plan. So through the affordable housing grant that's allocated to Angus, that amount will go towards that project.
Well, can I just say, convener, and to Catherine, etc., really, I'm fair chuffed when I hear that, because that was another site that just was left to rack and ruin, and you had urban, whatever they're called, going in there with their cameras and all sorts of nonsense. And old hospitals are primed for that. So well done there, and I'm fair chuffed to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Now, Kenny, are you a question or a comment?
It's a comment, convener.
Okay, can we open up the comments then? Starting with Councillor Braze.
Okay, thanks, convener. Yourself and Councillor Fairweather recognise the fantastic efforts that our officers and staff have played over recent days in this atrocious weather, and that, of course, extends to those in our housing department who went to great efforts in really atrocious, frightening conditions, particularly in Brecon, where a torrent of water was raging through the town. Did a magnificent job, and I would ask John to convey our appreciation to all his staff who were involved in that effort. I'm sure everyone in this meeting recognises the link between housing conditions, physical, mental and public health, and also the quality of life for our tenants. It's this administration's intention to continue the work, raising the standard of accommodation for our tenants and providing more homes for people to move into. Now, as Mr. Morrow indicated, this is going to be challenging in the immediate future because of raging inflation. Also, contractor issues and difficulty in getting anyone to quote for accurately for tenders at all. So it is going to be difficult, but there is a plan and we will make progress. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brace. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. It's just on 4.1 on page 31. I would just like to congratulate the council officers and its RSL partners for delivering 148 new build affordable homes against a target of 120. A great achievement during a very difficult time. And on 4.5, so we have touched on this, I'm also very pleased to see we're accelerating the void delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren, and echo those words as well. Right, we're ready to move on to the recommendations, which is on page 30. So yeah, we look at the recommendations. We were asked to approve the content of the SHIP, which is recommendation 1. Do we approve the content of the SHIP 22-23 onwards?
Agreed.
Yeah, and recommendation 2, approve the ongoing development of the SHIP and its associated programme plans and procedures with the council's partners. We agree on that?
Agreed.
Excellent. Now let's move on to agenda item 6, which is the Angus Council Nature Restoration Fund allocation. It starts off on page 63. Who's presenting that for the council? Is it Alison?
Yeah, I'll just introduce it, but Kellyanne Dempsey is here to provide the specifics of projects that are being put forward. So this is the second year of the Nature Restoration Fund allocation that we've had. And as we did last year, we're bringing forward recommendations on a number of projects which fit the criteria and which can be delivered in the timescale of the funding. So happy to take any questions, and Kellyanne will answer the specifics, as I say, in terms of any of the projects that are recommended.
So we've got a question, I think, from Councillor Cowdery.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, so first of all, I just wanted to congratulate officers and everyone who's been responsible for putting these proposals together, because I'm aware of the very tight deadline that exists on the Nature Restoration Fund bids. So these are great. Thank you. My question is really just to ask for clarification about reporting back on outcomes being achieved. I just wanted some assurance that there's a sort of tangible set of outcomes which can be measured, and then we can assess the success at a later date.
I can answer that, Alison. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cowdery. So last year with the allocation we were awarded, we did have to report back in about May to Nature Scot. So that is one stream of reporting that we'll have to do. We will, through our corporate group, looking at maybe the allocation we get next year, look at the successes and challenges of hopefully what we achieve this year. We also, at the end of 2023, will have to do our 3-year statutory biodiversity duty report. So that will go to Scottish Government, and it will also be included in the public body's duty report, climate change reporting next year as well. So I think that's about 4 off the top of my head I can think of. Biodiversity action plan monitoring too.
Perfect. That's great. That's what I was looking for, actually. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I welcome this report as well. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions regarding the areas in Montrose that are going to be looked at here. We've got the Burrowfield Pond. I was involved in cleaning that up a couple of years back there. Just it was during lockdown. We went out. There was shopping trolleys, bikes, loads of stuff in there that we all cleared out. And I understand, I think it's possibly going to be, forget the name of it, a landing thing for the birds in the middle. I think that's what it's going to be there. If we could have that confirmed. And also the Curly Pond, going back to 2017, I think that's when it was, the Montrose Common Good had actually agreed to spend £36,000 to have all the reeds removed out of there, and it was all swallowed up very quickly. The 36 was supposed to be over a 3-year period, and it ended up getting swallowed up in year 1. There was just so much of it. So I was just looking to find out what's actually getting done at the Curly, because I don't believe there'll be any of the reeds will be coming back out of there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stewart. So I'll start with Butterfield Pond. So Butterfield Pond, as you'll know just now, has no access in and out for any kind of wildlife. So one of the key features here, which makes it slightly more expensive than the works at the Curly Pond, is that we propose to put a sort of island structure in the middle so that ducklings and other animals have refuge away from people and dogs on the fringe of the pond area. And because there's no access in and out, that has to be created from scratch, whereas the other pond does have some small areas of access in and out. So there will be vegetation planted around the side, which also gives refuge for species, and we'll put interpretation up at site and also change the grass planting, so it all connects the existing tree cover and planting back towards the pond, so that will make it better for amphibians as well as the bird species that you'll see there. And also the pondweed that I think you'd previously removed some of that fluctuates in temperature and runoff into the pond, but I think having other vegetation around there too, and the island will be vegetated, that will help with the water, keeping that clean. But the pondweed itself is not a bad thing, but we'll probably explain bits and pieces about that on that interpretation for the community. And also at the Curly Pond, there is a large reed bed in there. This project will remove the large clump of reeds that's to the southeast side that is almost touching the edge of the pond walkway now. It is really expensive to remove reeds, but the reeds are a priority habitat, UK and national and local priority habitat, and they also are home to priority red list species. So it's not really best practice or policy to remove it. It also is doing quite a lot just now to filter out the pollutants that might come from the runoff into the pond. So they're actually really beneficial for wildlife at all stages. So our intention is to remove a certain area of reed bed, but not focus on the large area. And as you said, it was very costly. So again, this project is all about enhancing access in and out of the pond and just improving the vegetation and shelter for species, because they are refuge areas in our urban areas into our wider green networks as well.
Okay, would it be possible to have maybe a better communication with the public on that? Because, you know, the public seem possibly, would naive be the word to use for that. You know, I get a lot of communication from the public, and it's, you know, it's just like felt that we're not bothering about it, you know, and not, they're possibly not fully understanding the reasoning behind why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, so there will be interpretation. So you'll see from last year, breaking down some interpretations going in to explain the daylighting of the site there and the wetland meadow that's been created. So the interpretation that's been pulled together explains why certain techniques have been used there. So yes, there will be on-site information, and we will be doing probably the beginning of next year now a wider sort of nature and space for nature consultation project. But we do have regular consultation with the biodiversity partnership partners and organisations like TARG, who look at amphibians and reptiles. So we've had different amounts of consultation with different audiences.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Proctor, thanks.
Thank you very much, convener. Alison or Kellyanne. I've been involved in this now for the sort of past 10 years, and it's actually great see the strides and the progress we're making, and it feels really good. There's one question I'd like to ask, and that is the Dean Channel, which runs out of Forfar Loch into the River Dean now. Flooding in page 64, one of the bullet points, natural flood management actions is brought up. And although it's not in the report, I'm just looking to the future. A couple of years ago, a couple of farmers cleared the weeds out of the Dean Channel and allowed the water to flow freely, and it lowered the level of Forfar Loch, and it negated a lot of the flooding that we've seen of late. Are we looking to maybe in the future towards doing a similar exercise? I was asked this last night by one of the guys who actually carried out the clearing at a community council meeting. What's the sort of feelings? I don't know, Kellyanne, you may be the best one to answer on this one.
I'm aware before of, I think, maybe the roads flood team doing some vegetation removal just off the loch where the inflow is under the footpath bridge. But beyond where Angus Council can carry out works like that, I would imagine, and this is just an opinion, that it's private landowners who would carry out that work. And I don't know in the future, I know other projects we're working on in other areas and other water bodies, we're looking at trying to breach maybe embankments and have a little bit of more natural flood management or natural habitat. But I don't know if in such a prime quality agricultural area as that there'd be an appetite to do that kind of thing. I can look into it and find out a bit more if there are any plans from any local landowners, but it would definitely be, I think, private farmers who were carrying out the works.
Yeah, Kellyanne, that's absolutely right, because the bit we're talking about is up the farm there, and it is private landowners, as you quite rightly say. But I think it was sort of from SEPA or organisation that sort of said they shouldn't do it. But then they found by actually removing the weeds, the water flow was allowed, and it helped. With the movement of the water, and was better for the loch. But thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'd just like to remind councillors that at the end of each report, we've got contact email addresses for our officers. So some of these things that we maybe discussed today, and I'm not just picking on Councillor Proctor here, just for the whole committee as a reminder that we can contact officers about various different things that maybe don't directly relate to the report, but are related to what we're talking about. Might just help what we're trying to do. We get through the meetings and get through them in a timious manner. Just a pleasant reminder. We move to Councillor Louise Nicol.
Hi, I just want to say I also welcome this report. There are some really good projects proposed. I just wanted to mention Deputy Friends in Arbroath and ask would there be any future funding available to them, considering the amazing work that they do and have done.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol. Certainly, any proposals at all, please do send them on. We can look at that for if we are awarded money next year and look at what the fund priorities are. There's also the Biodiversity Action Plan. There's links to projects there. So there are different opportunities depending on what you identify, and we can help put you in touch with the right people to help with that or consider it in future project sort of scoping that we carry out too.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol, and we moved. Hands have disappeared. Councillor B.
Yeah, thanks, Kavina. On page 66 in the report, the Space for Nature hedgerow creation. I wondered if any of the allocated funds will be spent on planting hedgerows along the Forfar Path network, which is in need of a bit of a facelift.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. I think I would have to come back to you on exactly where the 3 locations were. I know roughly, and we have talked to the Parks team quite a bit and proposals were put forward, and we have looked at the path network, but I think I can come back to you once I've talked to my colleague who manages the path network.
Okay.
if you're happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely happy with that. That's fine, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thanks very much. Do we have any comments? Okay, no comments. So we're asked to agree the list of projects for the use of the Nature Restoration Fund. Are we happy to agree them?
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Hey, Councillor Fairweather, you want to come in here, or is this for the next item? You're muted, Councillor Fairweather.
I couldn't get my hand up, Chair, right, so, right, my apologies for that. Just quickly, right, coming back to what Councillor Nicholl brought up, where I welcome the proposals, right, and certainly, right, the work that the officers' recommendations and, right, and what they've done. I'd like just to go back just quickly to Kempty Friends. I wouldn't even be able to work out the thousands upon thousands of pounds and hours that particular group right have done and saved Angus Council, because it's Angus Council, otherwise it would have to look after that. So if there are future funds, perhaps the officers could get in touch with them, find out what their plans are, and that might be useful for them going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Fairweather. Right, we're moving on to agenda item 7. It's the school friendly zones at Muirfield Primary, Muirfield Primary, Arbroath, Ferrydale Primary and Langlands Primary School. Does anyone have any questions about the school friendly zones on item 7? Oh, sorry, Graham, you want to come in on that and introduce the report?
If you would like me to, convener, I'll introduce it.
Well, if you want me to, it's fine. It's up to you.
I'll be very quick. The report relates to the making of a permanent traffic regulation order. This is in connection with phase 1 of the experimental school friendly zones. Specifically, the 3 schools are Muirfield Primary School, Arbroath, Ferryden Primary School and Langlands Primary School, Forfar. As detailed in the report, there was a temporary traffic restriction order put in place. These can only be in place for 18 months. We've reviewed the effectiveness of the schemes and on balance concluded that they have been effective in terms of the objectives of improving safety, encouraging active travel, improving air quality. The report does ask to note one objection, which was relating to Ferryden Primary School, not discounting the objection we received, but again on balance we did not feel it was a reason to not proceed with making of a permanent traffic regulation order.
Thank you very much, Graham. Councillor Proctor.
Thanks very much, convener. Thank you, Graham, for the report. And it's great to see that the success in this sort of phase 1 experiment. Are there plans to roll this out in other private or other schools within Angus? Because I know certainly in my ward, a couple of schools would really benefit from this sort of thing. Air pollution, parking, everything what you've described earlier on. Is there going to be a sort of a further tranche, a sort of second look at this?
Councillor Proctor, that's already happening at the phase 2, and there's further primary schools where we have implemented temporary traffic restriction orders, and similar to phase 1, towards the end of the period or the experimental period, we'll review the same way we have done here and put forward a recommendation whether to make them permanent or not. I know that roads officers will assess whether we could add more schools. I think members will be well aware that it's very common throughout our schools to have issues regarding traffic. I know from discussion with roads officers, some schools, just because of the road network, lend themselves more easily to applying such orders. But yeah, the direct answer is yes, we're already doing that. We're already implementing the next phase, and we'll continue to monitor opportunities to do more.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you.
Any comments? Okay, I'll just give it a wee bit of time. I maybe rushed the last one. Okay, no comments. We're asked to recommend, or we're asked to note the objection received during the consultation period and agree making the title traffic regulation order is published. Are we happy to note the objection and agree the regulation?
Agreed.
Excellent stuff. Right, next item. We move on to item 8, the Arbroath Harbour Port Marine Safety Code audits on page 88 of your papers. Good audit here. Does any is it Graham? Are you presenting this one?
Yep, it's myself again, convener. Again, to try and be brief, this is now an annual audit of the Port Marine Safety Code that's carried out. It's the second year we've had the audit done. Similar to a lot of audits, there's it's either satisfactory an observation or non-compliance. Last year we had 2 non-compliances. This year we've none. There are a few observations, but less than the previous year. The detail of the audit's in the appendix, and if you look through there, in my view, there is nothing significant that we won't address in the coming year.
Thanks, Graham. And that is really something. When you look at what the recommended actions are, a lot of them seem very, very straightforward just to fix up. Councillor Fairweather.
Thank you. Right, I hope you don't mind, Chair, if it's a comment. Obviously, this report, this audit was brought up at the pre-agenda that I had last week regarding the Harbour Board, and I think it's timely to, with being in front of the committee, that we congratulate Bruce Fleming, the Harbour Master, and his staff. That's an excellent audit, and long may it continue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fairweather, and yeah, totally agree. Has anybody got any questions on this one? Okay, any comments? Further comments? Okay, so we'll look at the recommendations then on this one. We're asked to note the updated marine safety management system. We're asked to note the results of the Port Marine Safety Code audit in number 2, and in number 3, agree to Communities Committee members undertaking half a duty holder training on a date suitable and to ensure compliance with the code. So do we note and agree?
Agreed.
Excellent. Okay, good stuff. We move on to number 9, which is local bus service provision on page 165. And who have we got presenting this one? Is it you again, Graham?
Myself again. Yeah, this report asks members to note that we are extending 10 local bus service contracts to May 2024 and seeks authorisation to go up to tender to award 8 local bus service contracts. As detailed in the report, the way this functions is that we tender for 3-year contracts with the option to extend by up to a further 2 years. We are, as noted in the report, we're looking to take advantage of those extensions, with some exceptions where we are going out to tender so that it's integrated with other local service contracts where we feel there's best value to tender them together.
Graham. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, are we confident that we've covered everything in regards to the bus service from Montrose to Stracathro Hospital? We've had a lot of issues in the past where services have been dropped and staff have been unable to get to the hospital to work, and also coming back from the hospital after a night shift, they've possibly had to wait over an hour in the morning to get a bus that would come back to Montrose. So I spoke to Ian Leith previously about this, and they had to put on extra buses temporarily. So I was just looking to see if that was covered because it has been an issue for a lot of staff. Also on a Sunday as well, you know, getting to and from Stracathro.
Through yourself, Convener, I'll just to answer that. I expect I'll probably be repeating what Ian Leith has already said, Councillor Stewart, but this isn't just an Angus issue, it's a national issue where there has been challenges in terms of retaining and recruiting drivers, and I expect you've seen it covered well in the media, that the reliability of services have suffered as a result. If anything, I think maybe some of the routes in Angus less so compared with some of the commercial routes, which have tended to drop off before our subsidised routes. Is the feedback I have, at least. The other feedback I've got is that the industry is, the outlook is improving, and again, feedback I have is that there's confidence now that services will be more reliable, mainly due to more drivers coming into the pool for the main operators of our bus services. So yeah, it comes to Stewart knowledge there has been problems, but the feedback I have is that it's an improving picture, and with that in mind, I would hope that there won't be as many, if any, of the issues you just set out there.
Yeah, through yourself, Convener, it wasn't as much the issue that's ongoing with the lack of drivers and whatever. It was actually the bus service itself and the timetable. For instance, they were possibly having a bus that would get staff to work, but they wouldn't get there on time. They would end up being 10 or 15 minutes late to start their shift. So it was just obviously to get that the actual timetable to tie in with the start and the end of shifts. It just always seemed to be possibly 15 minutes. I mean, obviously I did mention that some staff coming off a night shift were having to wait an hour to get back to Montrose, just simply because there wasn't a bus on the timetable at that time.
Yeah, certainly. If that's not already been addressed, Councillor Stewart, I'll make a point of taking that up through our contract management with our providers to see what can be done, and I'll ask whether it's Ian Leith and myself to come back to you with an update on that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Convener. Graham, my question is more or less the same as what Councillor Stewart brought up. And I think you've answered the question Councillor Stewart made very well, very satisfactorily. I'd just like to point out that Ian Leith has done a sterling job working with people with the local community, and particularly with one of my constituents who's sort of got a web page going up about and short notice cancellations. And I think Mr. Leith's actually done an excellent job in keeping people aware of what's going on as best as he could. So I think you maybe should note that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Proctor. I'm sure Graham's noted that one. Councillor Durnall.
Thanks, Convener. Graham, the problem that we had that was when the MPs and MSPs was the bus service to the hospital for people's appointments. Because obviously with the taxis are now up in price, and to get a taxi to the hospital and back for someone to get, blood taken or something was costing about £14 round trip, which is in this cost of living crisis is a bit of a nightmare. Is there, when we're looking at tenders, is there any way we could maybe look at some kind of dial-a-bus kind of scheme where maybe a minibus could maybe pick up various people en route to hospital, something that would maybe be more cost effective for the vendor and for the general public, because that would be a service that would be used quite a lot, people going to hospital appointments. Just something food for thought for you. You know me, I'm always looking out the box. So that seems to be the problem at the moment, is hospital appointments is costing the general public a lot of money. Thank you.
To answer that, the answer is yes, it is something that I think the term that's used is demand response travel. is the industry term, and I know it's something that Ian Leith and his team are to looking at the feasibility and the affordability for such schemes. I mean, this report is more of a procedural nature in terms of, we're just putting forward to keep the service running. I mean, that kind of wider strategic look at how we deliver the service is something that we're also doing, not subject to this report we brought forward, but potentially in the future, maybe subject to a future report.
Right, move on to Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, mine is similar to what our colleagues have already said. Graham, probably one for yourself or Ian. I know Ian's not on the call, but I do use the bus reasonably frequent from going in Forfar to Dundee. But I used it a few weeks ago, and I had a lot of constituents complaining about the number 73. They were waiting on it. That's the one that goes from Arbroath direct to Nine Wells. And of course, they missed their hospital appointments because the buses just did not turn up. The overhead signs in the bus stops, I've highlighted this to the bus companies on several occasions, and I was waiting there a few weeks ago, and it came up, yes, it'll be here in 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, then due, and it just did not turn up at all. And that happened twice, so I was about 40 minutes in the bus stop. When I highlighted this to the bus company, they said it's the council's responsibility for updating the signs, the electronic signs. Is that the case? Or is it not the bus companies?
Yeah, as my understanding, we are responsible for the update of the bus timetables at the bus stops, but we do rely on the information from the bus companies to allow us to do that. So it's, in terms of the situation you described there, I wouldn't like to just, draw conclusions without finding out exactly what happened in terms of did we, have the information, and so again, I'll note that, and I'll see if we can get feedback on that. But as I said, it's a dual effort to try and keep these updated.
Yeah. This wasn't in Angus, by the way. It was in Dundee. So
right. That changes things slightly.
Well, exactly. Okay, thank you very much, convener.
And we kind of go on a question comment territory. Is there any further questions, comments on this, so we can get to the actual recommendations, which is, as Graham mentioned, the procedural aspects of renewing bus contracts. Okay, cool. Right, let's have a look at the recommendations then. Recommendation 1 and recommendation 2 are to note the decisions of the director. Do we note those?
Noted.
And we have to authorise in recommendation 3 the Director of Infrastructure in consultation with the Director of Legal and Democratic Service to award various services. Do we authorise the Director to do that?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Right, excellent. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is play parks on page 206, agenda item 10. Is it again you, Graham? Are you presenting this one?
It is, convener. This report relates to the grant allocation we've received from Scottish Government for the renewal of play parks. So this doesn't relate to creation of new play parks, but rather just the renewal of our existing play park estate. And this is the second year we've received the funding, and the allocation for the current financial year is £111,000. As set in the report, there is funding provisionally for future years that is quite substantial too. We do have the task of how we best utilise that funding. As explained in the report, our approach has been to base it on our survey, our condition surveys of the play areas, and base it on prioritisation based on most need. As a result of that survey work, we are proposing that the 3 play areas that are detailed in the report are renewed this year. Again, conscious of the fact that the geographical nature of where all the play areas are, we have done it based on need. But I would just highlight, as it's highlighted in the report, that there are further provisional allocations for the next 3 years, and I would expect that and hope that there'll be a good coverage across the council area in terms of play areas that will be subject to renewal. But just to repeat, our approach is based on prioritisation, based on most need.
Thank you, Graham. Does anybody have any questions on this one? No. Any comments? Councillor Stewart.
I wasn't quick enough there. It is a question.
No.
It's just, can someone tell me, can you tell me, Mr. Daly, what the difference is between a neighbourhood play area and a doorstep play area? There's obviously some form of difference, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it was there was a report that previously went up in 2013 from memory, and this was I'm going to call it a play park strategy. I'm not quite sure if if I've definitely got that correct, but part of that report was categorising our play areas, and we had destination play areas and the neighbourhood play areas and the doorstep, and the way it was defined was in terms of the number of items that are at the park. And I think probably as the name suggests, doorsteps are one that have a more limited range of items, a smaller play area, and then also it escalates from neighbourhood to destination from there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Fairweather.
Right, thanks, convener. Obviously, I'd like to again thank the officers, and as what Mr. Daly said, it was regarding need. And when I looked at the parks, they're all in my ward. So that's extremely welcome. Some of these bits of equipment that we've got, I must say, are well by their sell by date. But just to bring up quickly, if I remember rightly, the Scottish Government said that all play parks would be improved. Now I know this is going to be over a number of years, but they said all. Is that still the case?
Again, that is national policy, but my understanding is I would need to double check this, so I'll maybe qualify what I'm saying here, but I think it has been amended to as far as possible, or words to that effect. I think there is a realisation that the scale of funding that would be needed to renew the entire play area stock across Scotland is huge. And again, just to repeat, I would need to check that, but I think it has been words to the effect as far as possible.
Supplementary, please, Chair.
Councillor Fairweather.
Right, thanks, Chair. Well, Mr. Daly, if you can do that, at the end of the day, a promise, is a promise. If you make a statement like that, you should be sticking to it. So if you can come back and find what the position is, and I may bring something up at a later date. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fairweather. Councillor Meekin.
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough either. Mine is a question. It's just for a bit of clarity on the criteria of most need. Perhaps you can maybe tell what that means. Is it the condition of the equipment in the play area, or is it on some other kind of criteria?
We have parts officers to do safety inspections of all our play areas anyway, but also officers are trained to do just conditional surveys. And again, my understanding is that it is the equipment, but it's also the likes of the surfacing of the equipment sit on. So I wouldn't say it's only the equipment.
That's fine, thank you.
Councillor McLaren.
Yes, thank you, convener. This is also a question. I understand from a colleague who has spoken to the residents of Galashead community at length that they would welcome future funding to be spent on the modernisation of a play park in Glenoval Terrace. And I would ask if this is something that could be considered within the future funding allocation. But I do realise that Neighbourhood Services Committee on the 14th of November 2013, 5 of the play areas in Forfar were to receive no further investment. And at that time, the Galashiels community did show an interest in the future development of this play area. And it's something that they continue to do to this day.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Have you got anything on that, Graham?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the report Councillor McLaren refers to, and it was, as Councillor McLaren said, it was from 2013. And again, from memory, I think it was 20 play parks that were identified as surplus to requirement, and that there would be no further investment, and it would just be as the again our surveys, and basically we keep them until they were unfit for use. And it is correct that the Galashiels Play Park was one of them. That has been agreed, as I said, by committee in November 2013. Therefore, as a result, we won't be considering that for renewal. The only thing I would add to that is that, as always, we will engage with it. If there's a community group who are looking at funding avenues or, advice, anything along those lines, we will engage with them. But that is a committee decision that we are following.
You okay with that, Councillor McLaren?
Thank you.
Councillor Proctor.
Thank you very much, Convener. Mr. Daly, thank you very much for reassuring that other play parks other than Arbroath will be looked at in the future. And also the reassurance that, each play park, the equipment's inspected annually. My question is, the Peter Pan play park in Kirriemuir, which is very successful and used by not just kids from the local area, but people actually travel to the hill in the summertime and use that park. I hope that, because I've noticed some deterioration in some of the equipment, and I hope in the next financial year that that will be looked at favourable.
Thanks, Councillor Proctor. Is that noted, Graham? Yeah.
Noted.
Okay, and Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I think more than ever, we probably all just appreciate the benefits of our outdoor kind of places and spaces and play parks. I often get constituents who'll contact me with regards to some barriers that their young children experience with regards to accessing some of the parks and play equipment due to maybe a particular need or disability. So I just wondered, there is a couple lines in there, and there is some assurance within the equality impact assessment around catering for all needs. So I just wondered if there was a bit more detail on that, and also with regards to 5.3 and engagement with our local communities as well, to ensure that they're involved in the kind of the design and installs. Graham, are you able to just provide a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, a condition of the grant allocation is that we do engagement with the community, and the way in which we'll do that is that working with our colleagues in the Vibrant Communities team, we will engage with young people, young persons, whether that's through the school or any other groups that we identify, in terms of the choice of equipment and where reasonable the design of the renewal of the equipment we're putting in place.
Okay, thanks, Graham. And just maybe just a further assurance that the teams will look to ensure that that's kind of fairly represented, so that there are people with particular needs are able to feed into that, so that there is at least maybe one piece of equipment that's accessible to all.
I'll make a point of briefing the team that that's something we should endeavour to do.
Yeah, thank you. I know that this is Juta's report, and she's been really great in the past at kind of pushing that bit of work.
She has, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, is there any more comments on this one? Okay, do we agree the recommendation one? Oh, Councillor, sorry, there was Councillor Nicholl, did you have your hand up? Sorry, I missed that.
I was just wanting to follow on from Councillor Speed there and make a comment about how important community engagement is. It's mentioned more than once in the report in 3.5 and 5.3 about community engagement and how it's the focus for these play parks. And as much as I welcome all these upgrades to the play parks, it's really encouraging to see. I know from my own experience, my constituents, they have been disappointed in the past about consultation. And I've had quite a lot of people contact me about that. And so maybe in future we kind of need to look at how we can wider engage with the community beyond maybe playgroups and schools, because there's other users out with those groups that use these play parks.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholl. Councillor Cowdery.
Thank you. Yeah, just to comment on, very pleased, obviously, I know that all 3 projects that have had funding are in my ward. I just wanted to give a shout out to Freakham Play Park, because people talk about Arbroath. It's not Arbroath, it's a distinct community, obviously, you know, and I know they've been speaking to me and campaigning for a long time to get that play equipment replaced. So in a particular shout out to them. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Right, we need to recommend agree the recommendations one, agree the list of proposals for the renewal of play parks.
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed. Right, we move on to number 11, which is the management rules for parks. Now, if I seemed like I was a little bit flustered at the start of this meeting, it's because one of our councillor colleagues, Councillor Gregg, gave me a last minute notification that he wanted to speak in this item. So I had to obviously seek advice because this is not something I think in my time as a councillor I've actually seen. But according to Standing Order 36, he does have the ability to speak, but he cannot vote, and he only gets 3 minutes. This is based on his experience in the old with burial layers and things like that, which forms part of the park's paper. Now, procedurally, I'm just going to check with Fiona. Are we best going through the council discussion first and then having Ross come in afterwards, or are we best hearing from Ross first and then coming in afterwards? What do we think is the best way to go?
I think it would be appropriate to hear from Councillor Ross first, convener, and then then you could proceed with hearing from the officers maybe on the report.
Thank you, Fiona. The other thing I should add is on the standing orders, we need the agreement of the committee to do that. So are we happy as a committee to hear from Councillor Gregg?
Agreed.
Agreed.
So, is he in the room? Councillor Gregg, yeah, there he is. So Councillor Gregg, you've got, and I'm going to be really strict, you've got 3 minutes, okay? So 3 minutes starting from just now, okay?
Thank you, convener and committee, for allowing me to speak. As many are possibly aware, or maybe not aware, prior to my election, I worked as a funeral arranger. It's a job I very much loved. It was the sense of achievement and things that you would get from that, as well as the respect to the families, is something that you can't buy. Specifically with relations to this particular report, I refer to Appendix 2, which is on page 236 onwards of your combined papers. In the funeral industry, it's an industry that people don't like to talk about. People don't like to talk about death. People don't like to talk about dying. And there's still quite a big taboo around that subject. Also, the updating of procedures and things like that generally happens at an incredibly glacial pace because, again, of the taboos around death and dying. Having looked at this, there's a couple of things that immediately stand out to me as previously being a funeral arranger that I think would probably need a bit of updating. I did email convener expressing that as well. The first part I would look at is on page 236 under the interpretations, particularly coffin. So as per the report, it says coffin means any box or container enclosing remains. Now, with families, depending on religious background or cultural beliefs, there's now a growing trend for people to want to bury their loved ones in Hessian bags or shroud type things. So that would be classified as further on in the report as an uncoffined remains. So I think there needs to be further clarification on the item coffins. So I would suggest it would maybe include something that says a rigid material container. So whether that be like a wicker coffin or something like that. Further on from that, I would also look at when it says layer, the means of burial ground set aside for burial sufficient size and permanent of a burial of an adult body. I think that should probably change to human body, because when people think of adult body, they think of just adults, but also you could be interring children, babies, or NVFs, which are non-viable fetuses. So I think that would need to be updated too. Lastly, the other thing is the layer sizes. As people generally, so do the coffins, and oversized coffins are becoming more and more frequent. You can have issues where you have a coffin that's very, very close to the maximum interment size, which also includes the handles, which in this instance is 39 inches. Regulations state from the council that they must then purchase the second layer, and the cost of that could be quite prohibitive to families. So an at-need cost of an interment at the time of need for 2 layers would be £2,479.80. Compare that to the price of a cremation in Angus at £1,100. So I think that needs to be updated, and we could set a trend nationally by increasing our coffin-sized regulations for burials.
Councillor Gregg, that's your 3 minutes. Thank you for your contribution. I know I said I wasn't going to blame Councillor Proctor for not emailing, but I would suggest that when we go forward, if you aren't on the committee, it might be worth just sending an email well in advance of the meeting, just so that we can go through some of the details. Certainly makes it easier, you know, from my position as a convener. But thank you for your contribution there, Councillor Gregg. We move on to what we are, you know, the members of the committee, to go through the report. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Fairweather.
Yes, it's well, it's a part question, part comment, Chair. So bear with me, please. I'm looking at part 4 of the report on page 227. And I have concerns. In the past, convener, we've had a number of reports in the newspaper about dogs being in our cemeteries and out of control, or not out of control, doing something that certainly shouldn't be happening in a graveyard. Whereas the report does say in parks that the owner or person in charge of any such dog shall keep the dog under close control or on a short lead. Well, that's fine, but I think when it comes to graveyards and not parks, that it should be separate. Now, I remember going back quite a number of years. And this is going to be the question if we can do this again. It was under the SNP administration at that time, and there was signage which showed either dogs on lead or dogs off lead, and I certainly think dogs on lead for cemeteries should be brought back. I'm not saying for public parks, because they were in public parks as well, but certainly for cemeteries. I don't want to go back to the situation where I've got constituents coming on dismayed because somebody hasn't kept the dog under control. I know that I go to a cemetery quite often because I've got some very good friends who have passed away, and I always keep my dog either in the car or on a lead, and I think it's certainly something we should look at again. I don't think it would cost an awful lot of money. In fact, I think it would be it would cost virtually nothing. We've probably still got some of those signs hidden away in one of our stores. If that could be looked at again, I'd be much obliged, convener.
Graham, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I'll just say what's proposed. I'll just read out is no person shall cause any dog to be in a burial ground unless it's kept under proper control. We have tried to align with what's in the outdoor access code, but also we've spoke with our staff who work in the cemeteries every day and also who are familiar with the issues, and we feel that that is sufficient, and our experience suggests that that is sufficient. As I said, it does make reference to, there must be dog must be kept under control, and for most persons that will mean keeping your dog on a lead. But we consider it sufficient based on our experience of managing our current burial grounds.
Supplementary, please, Chair. Just quickly. Okay, I'll accept that. I'll accept that answer. But if we again have in the press somebody complaining, and it's happening in a cemetery, can we again go back and look at what the rules are? Thank you.
You want any comment on that, Graham?
What I would say is that the rules, hence the reason we brought the rules up today, they will be reviewed, the rules. They are subject to review. So of course, it goes without saying that, any issues or any feedback we receive will be reviewed. These rules won't be in place forever. We will review them.
That's fine, thank you.
I suppose, Graham, because I jumped the gun again on this one, you might have wanted to introduce it. I take it that would refer to Councillor Gregg's point as well, where he's raised some things that you may want to address, you may not, I don't know. Or is it a case of you'll go back to Councillor Gregg separately at this meeting?
Convener, I could provide answers now, or I could provide answers separately to the meeting.
If you want to just address it just now, that would be fine.
Okay. Just I noted these down as Councillor Gregg was speaking. I think in terms of his first point is about the definition of a coffin. I think I understand it's just you including the word rigid is the request there. I think that's a simple task that basically wouldn't really amend the overall meaning. It doesn't. I don't think it really affects the overall rules. Not, as I said, it's not a major task to do. My view is that it is sufficient in our experience. This has been our definition for a very, very long time without any issue. So I'm not discounting what Councillor Gregg says, but in my view, I don't think it's necessary, but it can be done easily, the change. In terms of the term, I think it was the definition of a layer and the term adult. I think that is required because the emphasis being on the size of the layer, not in terms of the who is going into the layer, because it is defined as it's an area. A layer means an area of ground within a burial ground set aside for burials being of sufficient size to permit the burial of an adult body. So that doesn't basically say whether it's an adult body that's going into the layer or not. It's simply so that we could set out what the size of the layer will be. Therefore, I would recommend that we keep that definition. In terms of the other point was about oversized coffins. Again, our team have years and years of experience. It does happen. Feedback I've had is that it's very, very rare. Maybe, I think as a guide, maybe one or two per year that we do work with families. It's obviously a sensitive matter, but there's we've always been able to accommodate because, for example, removing handles or using a layer at the end of a row. We did give consideration before of using instead of 1 metre layer, a 1.2 metre layer. The problem we have is that significantly reduces the capacity of our burial grounds if we do, if we were to do this as standard. So as I said, given, we have managed sufficiently and the impact it would have if we made this standard in terms of our capacity of burial grounds, I would suggest that the current approach is sufficient for now.
Thank you, Graham. We move on then to Councillor Proctor.
Thanks very much, convener. Paul, just regarding what Councillor Fairweather said about dogs in cemeteries, I agree with him entirely. And I would also ask Mr. Daly if there could actually, there's certain children's play parks where that can be mentioned as well, that dogs should be kept in the lead, because I've actually seen in Kirriemuir in 2 different play parks, people with their dogs, they go in there, they see the children running about, the kids are excited, the dogs are excited, and it doesn't breed the sort of, good safety. And often there's a mess left by the dogs, and some places dogs, and I think that's right, but I would agree with that. Second thing I'd just like to say, convener, I apologise for the short notice. It was just that Councillor Gregg mentioned this to me about the funeral. He's the expert, and I recall the way back in 2012, there was a similar situation. It was to do with wind farms, and I was asked to approach the convener to speak. It was Rob Murray actually at the time, and I did, and I advised him, because if Mr. Daly or anyone had come back to me with a question about what I was saying, I'm afraid I didn't have the technical ability to answer that, and that's why I suggested that Councillor Gregg approach you. And the last thing I'd just like to say, talking about layers and about the width, I was involved in organising a funeral for a soldier, and his body was brought back from Germany, and the German coffins are a lot wider than the British ones. And we did have an embarrassing situation that this was in Fife. The layer was dug to the standard width. They went to the burial, and we had to leave the coffin, walk away, and then the groundsman went and widened the layer so as it could be brought in. But it's something that we should, as Mr. Daly says, dealt with as and when it arises, and I think that's fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, so is there anything to come back there, Graham?
I think, just to repeat what I said previously, is that these rules will be subject to review again, and I just take note of the comments, particularly regarding just the management of dogs on our sites.
Thank you, Graham. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I just wanted to throw my tuppence worth in regards to the dogs in cemeteries. Obviously, Mr. Daly, he said there about it was not to be done easily in regards to the things that Councillor Ross Gregg had mentioned. I mean, it's the same view in regards to dogs, surely, then this thing with the cemeteries, it's something that maybe isn't necessary but could be changed quite easily, because I have experienced that with I've had constituents come on to me, and the dog owner, she was approached in the cemetery, and her dog was running all over the graves. And to be quite honest, I wouldn't even walk over a grave to get to somewhere else. I would walk around it, So that's just being respectful. And if people are allowing their dogs to run all over graves, then that isn't someone's interpretation of a dog being under control might not be the same as someone else's interpretation of that. And I think the only way to ensure that a dog is under control, especially in a cemetery, is on a lead. So, I would really urge you to reconsider doing that, and possibly just having that as, dogs on leads in cemeteries.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Brace.
There seems to be a lot of discontent, or a bit of discontentment, about dogs on leads in cemeteries. Shouldn't those who are discontent with this just have brought forward an amendment?
Thanks, Councillor Brace. Is there any further comments on the park rules? Councillor Fairweather. You're muted, Councillor Fairweather.
Right, thanks, Chair. Thanks for letting me come back. Just to let Councillor Braze know that I did speak to the group right yesterday, and I did consider bringing in an amendment. I didn't feel that was particularly necessary. Right, when I thought about it, I thought it would be better that we could debate it and put our points forward right to Mr. Daly. That's what we've done today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fairweather. And Councillor Speed.
Yeah, just really a quick comment, just to say to kind of a thanks and an acknowledgement to Councillor Gregg. I kind of really welcomed his input into this agenda item. I think it's, you know, quite refreshing that, you know, someone with Councillor Gregg's experience, which is a little bit unique perhaps, but I think he raised valid points with regards to, you know, the kind of subject matter and the kind of taboo around perhaps speaking about death and burial. So albeit that, you know, the kind of recommendations that he was making might not necessarily get taken on board or changed, because, you know, Mr. Daly gave a good kind of explanation as to why not. I still think it's good because it shows our kind of diverse representation and the differences that we can all bring to decision making. So just a thank you to Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Councillor Speed. And is there any more comments? Okay. Councillor Speed kind of just stole my thunder a bit there, because that's how I was going to conclude, to thank Councillor Gregg for bringing in his expertise to this, and also for everybody for their contributions. As Graham said, during the debate, I suppose the best way to call it, this gets reviewed, but it's also been noted, and there's some things that might be not too arduous to add. Other things, I think, from what Councillor Daly, what Graham Daly said during the course of the debate, was that this will be reviewed and looked at as we go forward. Would that be a fair assessment, Graham?
Yes, that's fair, Convener.
Okay, good stuff. So looking at that then, without any further questions or comments, if we could look at the recommendations, which is to recommendation 1, authorise the implementation of the attached management rules. Are we happy to authorise that?
Yep, agreed.
We've got to instruct the Director of Legal and Democratic Services to execute the management rules and burial ground regulations by signing on behalf of the Council. On recommendation 2, do we instruct the Director?
Agreed.
Yep, and the last one is we note the revised management rules will come into force on the date of their execution. Are we noting that?
Noted.
Right, excellent. Okay, we move on to agenda item 12, where there's a possible exclusion of the public and press. So we're asked to consider, in terms of our standing order 28.2, whether the public and press should be excluded, to consider agenda item 13. Are we? Will we exclude the public and press? Okay, good stuff. We got the YouTube off.
John, can